สวัสดีครับผมยินดีต้อนรับท่านผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะครับเข้าสู่การประชุมวิชาการด้านพิพิธภัณฑ์นะครับอาเซียนมิวเซียมฟอรัม 2018 นะครับซึ่งผู้จัดหลักของการประชุมวิชาการในครั้งนี้ก็คือสถาบันพิพิธภัณฑ์การเรียนรู้แห่งชาติหรือที่เรารู้จักกันในนามมิวเซียมสยามนะครับร่วมกับองค์กรจัดร่วมอีกหลากหลายองค์กรซึ่งผมจะได้กล่าวถึงในโอกาสต่อไปนะครับผมขออนุญาตแนะนำตัวก่อนนะครับผมชื่อภาสกรอินทุมานนะครับจากคณะศิลปกรรมศาสตร์มหาวิทยาลัยธรรมศาสตร์นะครับก็จะทำหน้าที่ดำเนินรายการในช่วงเช้านี้นะครับ Good morning all the honorary guests, delegates and participants. Welcome to ASEAN Museum Forum 2018, which is hosted by the National Discovery Museum Institute or Museum Siam and other collaborative organizations which I would address later. My name is Pasakon Intuman from the Faculty of Fine and Applied Arts, Thammasat University. I will be hosting the ceremony session and this morning session. แนวคิดหลักของงานประชุมปีนี้นะครับหรือว่าธีมของงานนะครับก็คือว่าด้วยเรื่องมิวเซียมมีเดียชื่อการประชุมนี้สื่อสาระเชื่อมพิพิธภัณฑ์โยงผู้คนนะครับซึ่งปีที่แล้วเราก็ได้มีการจัดเวทีลักษณะนี้ไปเช่นกันนะครับซึ่งปีที่แล้วเราก็เน้นในเรื่องการศึกษานะครับหรือ Museum Education นะครับThis year forum will be focusing on museum media, connecting museums, converging people. Actually last year we had this kind of forum as well, and last year theme was on museum education. ซึ่งในเวทีในลักษณะนี้นะครับก็จะเป็นพื้นที่ที่จะทำให้เราได้มีโอกาสแลกเปลี่ยนเรียนรู้ในท่ามกลางในหมู่คนที่ทำงานด้านพิพิธภัณฑ์นะครับและนักวิชาการที่สนใจงานด้านพิพิธภัณฑ์นะครับซึ่งเราก็ได้เรียนรู้จากรายละเอียดการทำงานขององค์กรที่ทำงานด้านนี้ในต่างประเทศด้วยนะครับก่อนที่จะเริ่มพิธีเปิดนะครับผมจะขออนุญาตให้ทุกท่านได้รับชมวิดีโอนำเสนอเกี่ยวกับการประชุมครั้งนี้ก่อนนะครับ Before proceeding to the opening ceremony, may I invite you to view to see the video presentation addressing the details of this forum. So please view the video.
เมื่อพิพิธภัณฑ์ปรับตัวให้เป็นพื้นที่แห่งการเรียนรู้เป็นพื้นที่ทางวัฒนธรรมที่รองรับทุกผู้คนพิพิธภัณฑ์จึงปรับตัวขนาดใหญ่เพื่อสื่อสารกับคนจำนวนมากให้สามารถเข้าถึงพิพิธภัณฑ์ได้การเป็นสื่อที่ส่งสารให้กับผู้เข้าชมจึงเป็นหน้าที่สำคัญของพิพิธภัณฑ์สื่อต่างๆช่วยสร้างประสบการณ์และเสริมการเรียนรู้ให้แก่ผู้เข้าชมได้มีส่วนร่วมมีปฏิสัมพันธ์นำไปสู่กิจกรรมที่สร้างความหมายมากขึ้นเมื่อรูปแบบการเรียนรู้มีมากกว่าการจัดวางวัตถุจึงมีการใช้สื่อที่หลากหลายทั้งสื่อดิจิทัลและสื่อวัสดุอุปกรณ์บทบาทของสื่อในงานพิพิธภัณฑ์ในโลกสมัยใหม่ได้พัฒนาไปในทิศทางใดถูกนำมาใช้ในพิพิธภัณฑ์อย่างไรทั้งการสื่อความหมายการเรียนรู้ด้วยตนเองสื่อเทคโนโลยีในพิพิธภัณฑ์และการพัฒนาผู้เข้าชมร่วมค้นหาคำตอบผ่านงานอาเซียนมิวเซียมโฟรัม 2018 งานประชุมครั้งนี้มุ่งเน้นถึงการเชื่อมต่อพิพิธภัณฑ์และการโยงผู้คนโดยเปิดพื้นที่ให้เกิดการพูดคุยเรื่องการใช้สื่อในพิพิธภัณฑ์ร่วมแบ่งปันข้อมูลและบทเรียนจากการทำงานแลกเปลี่ยนคำถามสำคัญต่อบทบาทของสื่อในเชิงการเรียนรู้และความยั่งยืนเพื่อสะท้อนความคิดความเข้าใจวิธีการและความท้าทายในการใช้สื่อพิพิธภัณฑ์รวมถึงการเรียนรู้และการแบ่งปันประสบการณ์องค์ปาฐกทั้ง4ท่านในงานอาเซียนมิวเซียมโฟรัม 2018 ประกอบด้วยมิสพัวไวเคนส์หัวหน้าฝ่ายวัตถุสะสมเมารีพิพิธภัณฑ์แห่งชาตินิวซีแลนด์ในหัวข้อสารแหปากใหม่ไปจับปลากลยุทธ์สื่อสำหรับการเชื่อมต่อพิพิธภัณฑ์กับผู้ชมชาวเมารีมิสเตอร์ฮันส์ไดเทอร์ฮานอดีตพันธารักษ์พิพิธภัณฑ์ยิวเบอร์ลินประเทศเยอรมนีในหัวข้อพิพิธภัณฑ์ทันสมัยข้อท้าทายในโลกดิจิทัลมิสเตอร์อู้เซ่าชุนหัวหน้าฝ่ายการศึกษานิทรรศการและบริการข้อมูลพิพิธภัณฑ์พระราชวังแห่งชาติประเทศไต้หวัน ในหัวข้อพิพิธภัณฑ์ดิจิทัลในฐานะสื่อพิพิธภัณฑ์ว่าด้วยยุทธศาสตร์ข่าวสารข้อมูล IT ของพิพิธภัณฑ์พระราชวังแห่งชาติและผลกระทบจากการแพร่กระจายของดิจิทัลมิสคาเรนชินอ้ายหญิงผู้ช่วยผู้อำนวยการฝ่ายการศึกษาสวนสัตว์สิงคโปร์ประเทศสิงคโปร์ในหัวข้อสวนสัตว์สมัยใหม่และพิพิธภัณฑ์สัตว์น้ำปฏิบัติการผู้ชมเป็นศูนย์กลางสำหรับคนทุกวัยหัวข้อย่อยของการประชุมในครั้งนี้ได้แก่สื่อพิพิธภัณฑ์กับการสร้างพื้นที่และพัฒนาสังคมสื่อพิพิธภัณฑ์กับการจัดการความท้าทายสื่อพิพิธภัณฑ์เพื่อทุกคนและการเรียนรู้ตลอดชีวิตสื่อดิจิทัลในพิพิธภัณฑ์การใช้กิจกรรมในฐานะสื่อเพื่อการเรียนรู้และเวทีเสวนาโต๊ะกลมได้แก่ประเด็นเรื่องสื่อที่ทำไม่ได้ใช้สื่อที่ใช้ไม่ได้ทำเสวนาโต๊ะกลมการคัดสรรและออกแบบการฉายภาพยนตร์สำหรับพิพิธภัณฑ์และสถาบันศิลปะจัดโดยมิวเซียมสยามสถาบันพิพิธภัณฑ์การเรียนรู้แห่งชาติด้วยความร่วมมือกับพิพิธภัณฑสถานแห่งชาติฟิลิปปินส์ศูนย์มนุษยวิทยาสิรินธรองค์การมหาชนคณะสังคมวิทยาและมานุษยวิทยามหาวิทยาลัยธรรมศาสตร์องค์การการศึกษาวิทยาศาสตร์และวัฒนธรรมแห่งสหประชาชาติคณะโบราณคดีมหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรสถาบันวิจัยภาษาและวัฒนธรรมเอเชียมหาวิทยาลัยมหิดลหอศิลปวัฒนธรรมแห่งกรุงเทพมหานครศูนย์ภูมิภาคโบราณคดีและวิจิตรศิลป์ในองค์การรัฐมนตรีศึกษาแห่งเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้พิพิธภัณฑสถานแห่งชาติกาญจนาภิเษกสถาบันเกิดเทประเทศไทย
และนั่นก็เป็นวิดีโอที่นำเสนอรายละเอียดของการประชุมครั้งนี้นะครับขอบคุณสำหรับเสียงปรบมือครับผมสำหรับรายละเอียดของแต่ละเวทีนะครับเวทีย่อยที่เกิดขึ้นในการประชุมครั้งนี้ท่านสามารถดูรายละเอียดได้จากหนังสือเล่มนี้นะฮะซึ่งเป็นกำหนดการทั้งหมดรายละเอียดของการนำเสนอเปเปอร์ต่างๆนะครับand that was the presentation of this forum. For some more details, you can find it in this program booklet, which is in your conference back. Okay. และในลำดับต่อไปนะครับเราก็จะเริ่มเข้าสู่พิธีเปิดนะครับซึ่งในเบื้องต้นนะครับขอเรียนเชิญคุณคัสราคมวรรณมุกดาวิจิตรนะครับผู้อำนวยการฝ่ายวิชาการสถาบันพิพิธภัณฑ์การรู้กล่าวรายงานการจัดงานนี้ครับ Now we are proceeding to the opening ceremony. First of all, I would like to welcome Ms. Kasara Kamawan Mukdawicit, the Director of Academic Division, National Discovery Museum Institute, to give some background information about this forum, please.
จริงๆก็พูดไปหมดแล้วในวิดีโอ ก็เรียนผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะคะเรียนผู้อำนวยการสถาบันพิพิธภัณฑ์การเรียนรู้แห่งชาตินะคะอาเซียนมิวเซียมฟอรัมเนี่ยก็จัดขึ้นในธีมที่ท่านได้เห็นไปในวิดีโอเมื่อกี้นะคะก็คือ Museum Media Connecting Museums Converging People หรือว่าสื่อพิพิธภัณฑ์เชื่อมพิพิธภัณฑ์โยงผู้คนวัตถุประสงค์ของการจัดงานนะคะก็คือเพื่อรวบรวมปรากฏการณ์ของการใช้สื่อภายในพิพิธภัณฑ์เพื่อสร้างเวทีการแลกเปลี่ยนความรู้และประสบการณ์ระหว่างผู้ปฏิบัติงานด้านพิพิธภัณฑ์และเพื่อสร้างการแลกเปลี่ยนระหว่างผู้ปฏิบัติงานพิพิธภัณฑ์ในประเทศไทยและประเทศเพื่อนบ้านนะคะองค์กรร่วมจัดก็ตามที่ท่านเห็นไปแล้วนะคะว่ามีใครบ้างมีศูนย์มนุษยวิทยาสิรินธรพิพิธภัณฑสถานแห่งชาติฟิลิปปินส์พิพิธภัณฑสถานแห่งชาติกาญจนาภิเษกนะคะคณะสังคมวิทยาและมนุษยวิทยามหาวิทยาลัยธรรมศาสตร์คณะโบราณคดีมหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรสถาบันวิจัยภาษาและวัฒนธรรมเอเชียมหาวิทยาลัยมหิดลยูเนสโกหอศิลปะวัฒนธรรมแห่งกรุงเทพมหานครสถาบันเกิดเทประเทศไทยแล้วก็สปาฟ่านะคะการจัดงานในครั้งนี้ก็มีปาฐกถาโดยนักวิชาการจากต่างประเทศ4ประเทศนะคะมีการเสนองานจากนักวิชาการแล้วก็ผู้ปฏิบัติงานทางด้านพิพิธภัณฑ์จากประเทศไทยแล้วก็ประเทศเพื่อนบ้านรวมกันแล้วก็ประมาณ40คนนะคะแล้วก็สำหรับผู้เข้าชมที่ได้ลงทะเบียนมาก็ประมาณ300คนนะคะบัดนี้ก็ได้เวลาสมควรนะคะขอเรียนเชิญผู้อำนวยการสถาบันพิพิธภัณฑ์สถานแห่งผู้อำนวยการสถาบันพิพิธภัณฑ์การเรียนรู้แห่งชาตินะคะกล่าวเปิดงานอาเซียนมิวเซียมฟอรัมค่ะ
ครับลำดับถัดไปก็ขอเรียนเชิญคุณราเมศพรมเย็นนะครับผู้อำนวยการสถาบันพิพิธภัณฑ์การเรียนรู้แห่งชาติกล่าวเปิดงานนะครับ Next may I invite คุณ Mr. Ramed Promyen, the Director of the National Discovery Museum Institute, to give an opening remark, please. คุณ Ramed
เรียนท่านแขกผู้มีเกียรติครับท่านผู้แทนและผู้บริหารระดับสูงจากศูนย์มนุษยวิทยาสิรินธรพิพิธภัณฑสถานแห่งชาติฟิลิปปินส์พิพิธภัณฑสถานแห่งชาติกาญจนาภิเษกคณะสังคมวิทยาและมนุษยวิทยามหาวิทยาลัยธรรมศาสตร์คณะโบราณคดีมหาวิทยาลัยศิลปากรสถาบันภาษาและวัฒนธรรมเอเชียมหาวิทยาลัยมหิดลองค์กรการศึกษาวิทยาศาสตร์และวัฒนธรรมแห่งสหประชาชาติหรือยูเนสโกหอศิลปวัฒนธรรมแห่งกรุงเทพมหานครสถาบันเกอเต้ประเทศไทยศูนย์ภูมิภาคโบราณคดีและวิจิตรศิลป์ในองค์การรัฐมนตรีศึกษาแห่งเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้หรือซิมิโอสปาฟาท่านแขกผู้มีเกียรติท่านสื่อมวลชนทุกท่านครับในนามของมิวเซียมสยามสถาบันพิพิธภัณฑ์การเรียนรู้แห่งชาติผมรู้สึกยินดีและขอต้อนรับทุกท่านเข้าสู่การประชุมวิชาการพิพิธภัณฑ์อาเซียนซึ่งจัดขึ้นในครั้งนี้ครับเป็นที่ทราบกันดีว่าทุกท่านนั้นซึ่งอยู่ในแวดวงพิพิธภัณฑ์จะทราบกันดีว่าในทุกๆวันนี้ในโลกยุคใหม่นี้นั้นพิพิธภัณฑ์ได้มีบทบาทที่หลากหลายมากยิ่งขึ้นในสังคมพิพิธภัณฑ์จะต้องปรับตัวรูปแบบในการทำงานที่หลากหลายพิพิธภัณฑ์จะสื่อสารความรู้กับประชาชนซึ่งมีภูมิหลังที่แตกต่างกันอย่างมากมายกระบวนการหรือรูปแบบของการเปลี่ยนแปลงเหล่านี้นั้นจำเป็นจะต้องตระหนักในหลายๆประเด็นไม่ว่าจะเรื่องของในมิติของการจัดนิทรรศการในส่วนของนิทรรศการเองก็ตามหรือในส่วนที่เราเรียกว่าส่วนของวัตถุจัดแสดงหรือสื่อการเรียนรู้ต่างๆที่เราใช้ให้กับผู้ชมซึ่งมีความแตกต่างหลากหลายกันทั้งกายภาพหรือความรู้หรือทั้งอายุก็ตามรวมทั้งสื่อที่จับต้องไม่ได้และสื่อที่เป็นเรื่องของดิจิทัลและที่ยิ่งกว่านั้นคือส่วนที่อยู่เบื้องหลังหรือเรียกว่าระบบที่เป็นโครงสร้างพื้นฐานของการที่จะเชื่อมโยงสื่อต่างๆที่พูดถึงเข้ากับผู้ชมนั้นจะสามารถเชื่อมโยงเข้ากันอย่างไรสิ่งที่มีบทบาทยิ่งกว่านั้นคือในโลกยุคปัจจุบันในโลกของยุคไร้พรมแดนนั่นเองนั้นเราจะทำอย่างไรให้พิพิธภัณฑ์ของเรานั้นที่ต้องการที่จะเป็นพิพิธภัณฑ์ที่ไร้กำแพงหรือไร้พรมแดนเราจะเชื่อมโยงพิพิธภัณฑ์เราจะเชื่อมโยงผู้คนซึ่งอยู่นอกพรมแดนแห่งกายภาพให้มาเกิดความเชื่อมโยงกันในอนาคตได้อย่างไรประเด็นต่างๆเหล่านี้ครับเป็นคำถามและคำถามนี้จึงเป็นประเด็นซึ่งนำมาสู่การจัดงานประชุมทางวิชาการพิพิธภัณฑ์ครั้งนี้ขึ้นในประเด็นเรื่องของมิวเซียมมีเดียและสิ่งนี้เองเป็นก้าวแรกๆของมิวเซียมในประเทศไทยและมิวเซียมในอาเซียนเช่นกันที่เราได้เชิญชวนกลุ่มเพื่อนๆพิพิธภัณฑ์ในอาเซียนให้มามีโอกาสในการที่จะแบ่งปันความรู้มามีโอกาสในการที่จะแลกเปลี่ยนเรียนรู้ซึ่งกันและกันสำหรับการจัดงานวันนี้นั้นก็หวังไปอย่างยิ่งครับว่าจะเกิดประโยชน์ในของการที่เราจะได้นำองค์ความรู้นั้นมาแลกเปลี่ยนเรียนรู้มามีส่วนของการที่จะพัฒนางานหรือมีส่วนที่จะกระเพื่อมการพัฒนางานที่จะต่อยอดสู่การพัฒนาในอนาคตซึ่งเรามุ่งหวังและประสงค์ไว้นะครับสุดท้ายนี้ผมขอขอบคุณนะครับขอขอบคุณองค์กรร่วมจัดทุกท่านขอขอบคุณท่านวิทยากรซึ่งเป็นเพื่อนๆเราจากมิวเซียมต่างๆทั่วโลกขอขอบคุณภาคีเครือข่ายและผู้มีส่วนร่วมทุกท่านวันนี้ถึงเวลาแล้วครับผมขออนุญาตกล่าวเปิดการประชุมสัมมนาวิชาการอาเซียนมิวเซียมฟอรัม2018ครับขอบคุณครับ
เริ่มเข้าสู่เวทีวิชาการกันแล้วนะครับก็คือในช่วงแรกเนี่ยนะครับก็จะเป็นปาฐกถานะครับของแขกรับเชิญที่เราได้เชิญมานะครับ Now we are proceeding to our first keynote speech. The first keynote speech titled "A New Net Goes Fishing: Media Strategies to Connect Museums to Maori Audiences." May I invite and I would like all of us to welcome our first keynote speaker, Ms. Pawai Kane, please. Ms. Pawai Kane is the head of Maturanga Maori, head of Maori collection at Te Papa Tongarewa, the National Museum of New Zealand. She is specialized in contemporary Maori social history, advocates community-centered curatorial practice, and has advised multiple museum projects nationally and internationally. She has a particular interest in increasing and enhancing Maori representation and participation across the heritage sector. She is also a board member for a Tamira dance company, Pantograph Punch, and the New Zealand National Army Museum. Please welcome Ms. Paula Ken.
Thank you. Tēnei te mihi atu kia koutou katoa, ki ngā iwi taketake o tēnei rohe, ki ngā iwi taketake o te moana nui a kiwa, tēnā no koutou. I rau rangatira mā, ngā reo, ngā mana, tēnā no koutou, he mihi nunui mai tētahi uri o tauranga moana. Kia ora. Hello, my name is Pua Waikens. Thank you for my introduction. I am the head of the Māori curatorial team at Te Papatongarewa, the National Museum of New Zealand. I'm so pleased to be able to come here. Thank you very much to my friend Kusra for extending an invitation to have the honour of coming to speak to you on such an exciting topic and a forum filled with so many very exciting thinkers. So I'm very much looking forward to learning from all the people who are going to be sharing ideas today. What I'm going to talk about is the way that media has affected and can affect Māori participation and Māori representation in museums. So I'm going to be going through a series of different case studies, either projects that I've worked on or projects that other people, other advocates like myself, Māori advocates, have deployed as part of their mission to get Māori stories heard. So when the request for this presentation came out, because I'm a very participation-based curator, I decided to send the call out to a lot of my friends across the museum sector and across my museum and ask them, can you give me some of the best ideas that you've got in terms of media? So I'm very grateful to the people who responded to that call and helped me put together this presentation. So I no way want you to think that the ideas that are in here are just mine alone. It's very much a shared presentation because of the connectivity and the collaboration that is happening across the sector in New Zealand, especially between Māori. So I've called this A New Net Goes Fishing, Media Platforms to Connect Museums to Māori. I'm speaking very much as a curator here. I'm not a digital media creator. The extent of my digital creation goes as far as embedding media files into this PowerPoint, and that's as far as I go. But what I am is someone who uses media and tools to help me create new platforms to tell stories. So this whole presentation is going to be premised on the fact that I consider media just another selection of new tools, new presentation tools, new exhibition tools, new research tools, new dissemination tools, and how useful they can be to help me work for Māori. So just to give you some vital statistics, some contextual information, first of all, about my people. Who are the Māori people? So we're the Indigenous people of New Zealand. We are Pacific people with Austronesian roots, but landed in New Zealand, which we call Aotearoa, probably around about 1200 AD. And it was there that the people who landed developed their own culture that became unique in the world, and that was the development of the Māori people. Māori people occur nowhere else. Our culture has not developed anywhere else. So we're unique to Aotearoa. Approximately, as you can see from our stats, we're approximately 15% of the New Zealand population, so we're definitely a minority. Our numbers are around about 650,000. So we're a minor player, but actually the biggest ethnic group after European, who we call Pākehā. We are tribally grouped. So the way that I would identify myself to a wide room of Māori people would be to tell them what my tribe was. And then through that, they can, a Māori person would be able to link your genealogy and address the connections that exist between you and them. So there are around about, maybe about 140 odd tribes across New Zealand. But then those tribes break into smaller sub-tribes. So it's very much a familial grouping. Tribes are based on the connections between families. One interesting thing, though, is that our tribal identity is usually place attached, usually connected to a place where your ancestors have developed their own sense of identity. But increasingly, Māori are no longer living in those areas, they're living in the cities. So the tribal identity becomes something more abstract. In terms of visitation to my museum, so my museum is located in Wellington, which is at the bottom end of the North Island, which we call, it's the capital of New Zealand, Wellington. And our visitation, we get around about 1.2 million visitors a year, and Māori make up around about 9% of that audience, of the domestic audience. Sometimes we'll go up as far as 11%. At the moment, we've dropped back down to 9%. So we're not quite yet reaching the target that I would like, which is that Māori audiences should constitute 15%, because that's 15% of the population. So it's an ongoing mission to try and bring Māori people into the museum. And there's also the Māori diaspora. So over in Australia, we have around about 140,000 Māori living there. And we've got Māori that are right throughout the world. So links, media, especially social media, has created these new links between Māori who have moved offshore and are struggling or are searching for aspects of their culture. So they're a very important part of my vision when I think about how media can contribute to connectivity. And a bit about my museum. So if you've ever visited New Zealand, somebody would have probably told you go and visit Te Papa. We're the largest museum in the country. We're the National Museum of New Zealand, and we are a hybrid of the National Museum and the National Art Gallery. It was opened in 1998, so it's quite a young museum in terms of its practice, but it has inherited collections that began as far back as 1865. And the museum is based on bicultural principles. In 1840, Māori signed the Treaty of Waitangi with representatives of the then quite young colonial government. The Treaty of Waitangi was an agreement by Māori to the Europeans who were starting to come into New Zealand that yes, we allow you to come into New Zealand, yes, you can form a government, but we must still retain access to our treasures. And that is where my work comes in, that my work is a response to that request in the Treaty of Waitangi, that I must ensure that Māori constantly have access to their treasures, and I consider that the treasures of the stories and the objects that Te Papa holds. Te Papa is actually enshrined in a government act, the Te Papa Tongarewa Act of 1992. So as far back as 1992, 6 years before Te Papa itself opened, an act was carried in Parliament stipulating the specific obligations that Te Papa was supposed to carry out as its duty. And I just want to draw the attention to especially Article B, which talks about the museum and especially the board endeavouring to ensure both that the museum expresses and recognises the mana. Mana is like our word for prestige. The mana and significance of Māori, European and other major traditions and cultural heritages, and that the museum provides the means for every such culture to contribute effectively to the museum as a statement of New Zealand's identity. So we are effectively, Māori representation and power is enshrined as a government act. So as a practitioner within the museum, it is my responsibility to make sure I operationalise the ideals of this Parliamentary Act. And just before I launch into some of the case studies that I've got here for you, I want to take up the words of Maina Mackenzie, who was the first and to this day the only Māori female museum director in New Zealand. So as much as there's a lot of embracing of biculturalism and Māori presence within museums, we still do not have the executive positions that allow top-down influence. But Maina Mackenzie wrote these words in 1993, and 25 years later I reflect on them constantly and feel that the things that she's asking for, the challenge that she's asking museums to respond to, these words could have just been written last week. And what she's asking is that Māori are incorporated, Māori are given a place within the museums as curators, as collection managers, as storytellers, in order that Māori culture can be examined as a continuum, not just as moments captured in time and reflected and refracted through settler eyes. So this was an attempt to decolonize the museum by enhancing and enriching the Māori presence within it. So we would permeate everything in order to make sure that there was a more Māori way of doing things. And 25 years later, this is still an ongoing battle to get more Māori engaged in museums, employed by museums, and especially in light of really a global issue, which is the reduced funding of the heritage sector. So many museums in New Zealand are struggling with limited funding. So as that starts to taper off and we're expected to go after more commercial funding, the populist nature of that can sometimes work against the ideals that Maina has set in her paper in 1993. Because Māori are easily sacrificed when you're going for the popular, when you're going for the mass visitation market. So I'm just going to summarize what I try and think about and do when I am working with new media. And I've been very liberal in my term of the use of media. It's not just dedicated to technology. It's a number of different things. Any kind of tool that is used almost as an interpretation, exhibition interpretation, to help a story be told. But I do include in here digital media, social media, any kind of media. But I'm just going to let you know what my agenda is. So again, just to reiterate, I consider new media not to be its own beast, but something that is just a new series, a new toolbox of tools for people like me to use in order to figure out the best approach for my people. How do I use these new tools to go into the communities that are not coming to Te Papa, who don't live in Wellington? How do I push through the walls of the museum and get to them using these new tools? I like to experiment with different media forms, and I actually don't care if I'm going to look like an idiot or if I'll fail. I prefer to try something and fail rather than never try it and never know. So there have been a few times when I've started doing little mini projects, especially in my social media research, which I'll go into, where it was a little bit risky and the museum wasn't quite sure what I was up to and thought I might be potentially compromising their reputation. But you have to try, because the conventional tools that the museum has been using has only managed to get 9% of the people in. I think we need to try new things. I'm really big on encouraging new ideation around me. I have a very embracing, inclusive way of working. So whether non-Māori or Māori, I just want people to be thinking about what new tools can they develop and then try and support them in that. So I don't try and control the ideation, I just want people around me thinking all the time. And also to tell them, I don't have all the answers, that's what you're here for. I want you here to help me find the right solution. I'm also incredibly transparent about my agenda, which has been the first 12 minutes of this presentation, that I am about reaching Māori audiences and to be effective for Māori storytelling. And you can kind of almost get the suggestion from that statement that it's actually incidental. It's not even really relevant that I'm in a museum. I'm about getting these stories told, whether it's in a museum or outside the museum. And I try and push my agenda onto every creative and strategic thinker who is in my realm. And that's been very effective too, because what I find is that because they clearly know what I'm after, when they come into a meeting with me, they've already done their thinking about how can I help Puawai? How can I help Puawai? It's been very, very useful. So if you are a person who's trying to influence other people to think about how they can help your agenda, you start broadcasting that wide. And I'm constantly on the lookout outside the museum for new people. So I don't look to the museum to be the center of all things. The museum in the Māori world is just a very small bit player in terms of our culture and our storytelling. And I think that's a healthy thing. I don't want to be the center of my cultural, I don't want the museum, which is colonial at its heart, to be the center of telling my people's stories. But I want my people to be able to influence the culture of the storytelling. And the only way I can do that is bringing in Māori storytellers, Māori media creators, and using ideas that they make. And that goes on to my final point. The thing that I'm always trying to search for is how to decolonize museums. How do I decenter the white European middle-class, middle-aged voice within the museum so that my people are heard? So I'm looking for media creators that can help that. And it's a bit of a challenge, because people think that when you're identified as the status quo, that it's an insult. But what it is that we've heard enough from you, 180 years from you, let's try and share the microphone with someone else. So on to my case studies. Gallipoli, The Scale of Our War, was an exhibition that opened up in 2015. To this day, it is the most popular exhibition that's ever been developed in New Zealand. I think we've hit around about 2 million or so people, and for a country with our population, that is quite astounding. It was funded as part of the World War I 100th commemorations that started unfolding in August 2014, and Te Papa decided that we were going to do an exhibition which would be our contribution. I am not a military researcher, I'm a curator and I'm a pretty good researcher, but I am not a military historian. However, they wanted the Māori story to be put into this, so I was assigned to the project alongside 3 other curators who were European. And I began by hunting through different stories. As you do as a curator, you start your project by doing a literature review, by looking at what's already been published and assembling the big narrative, and also start to identify the gaps. And what I found is that Māori participation, especially at Gallipoli, which is where we were focusing our exhibition, was completely unknown. They were only recorded in 2 books, scattered throughout newly digitized service records. So the stories of the Māori soldiers, the personal stories, were incredibly difficult to find. So at that point I could have given up. But I didn't, because I'm a very persistent type, and I decided I was going to use my social media channels. I was very cheeky. I was being a bit risky at that point, but I wasn't getting any joy from any of the institutional archives, so I thought I would go to the next best archive, the archive of Māori people on Facebook. And so what I would do is I would be very open about what I didn't know. I used my own Facebook profile, so excuse the very shameless, vain selfie that I took way back then. But I decided I'd use my own voice rather than using the Te Papa channel, because Māori wouldn't really share with the Te Papa channel. So I thought if I put up what I know, so I effectively did a narrative. I pulled up a picture of this soldier, one of the Māori soldiers from the first contingent that went to Gallipoli, created the narrative, said what I was after, and it was so effective because I started getting grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had never seen these photos of these men giving me and sharing with me the personal stories, and they ended up becoming part of the research narrative because they were very happy to share. Because one was that even though I had pulled the soldiers' pictures out of the archives, they had no idea that that picture existed. Because Roy Devon, who you see here, he died when he was only around about in his late 20s, so nobody had seen this early picture of him. This is another soldier, Ned Clark. So I did it again, going, my, that was really successful. Let's do all of the Māori soldiers. So for about 1.5 years, I would just publish, just on Facebook, a picture of the soldier, what I knew, and ask if anybody had any stories about him. And sure enough, I got back another one, another grandson who had never seen a picture of him, didn't even know that he had gone to war, but suddenly realized, oh, that's why there was an unexploded grenade in my granddad's garage. So it was trying to reconcile the family stories of their grandfather with the official story that yes, he was a soldier and he probably took home an undecommissioned grenade. So just to go back, that was so effective. I actually ended up using that as a TEDx talk in 2015, and I was hugely pregnant. But it was one of the opportunities, I thought, to use yet another platform to make sure that Māori stories were heard. And I contacted each of those family members who shared things with me online over Facebook, and that became the basis of my TEDx talk, which then has actually led more Māori groups to come and approach me and ask me for help with their own family research. So the lesson is that don't be afraid to go out and declare what you don't know, as long as you have a very good agenda, very clear agenda, and you're very clear with what you want to do with the information. And people will share it with you. And when I told them, look, I can't put these men in the exhibition I had originally intended, they haven't made the exhibition list, but these stories are so brilliant. Do you mind if I use it in a TEDx talk? And of course, so it was a very good strategy. So that's social media to connect with people. The next one is this kind of case study came from my colleague, Tui McDonald, who is at Te Papa. She's the general manager of a new unit that we've established called Mahuki. So Mahuki is Te Papa's embrace of the startup. So we've created an innovation hub around about 3 years ago, and it's a hub that's effectively funding itself. So Te Papa gave it some seed funding, but now sponsors put money into it, so it's operating solely off sponsorship. And it brings in cohorts of media creators, people who are making new ideas for the heritage sector, and you become a partner. It's almost like bringing in entrepreneurs and nurturing them with funding and support and an office space. And then you get a small percentage of whatever they go on to make. So this is our startup innovation, and what we've found is that Mahuki is actually bringing in Māori and Pacific makers who hadn't really considered the museum, but they're making things that we will end up finding very useful if they're allowed to grow. So it's been hugely beneficial as an experiment by Te Papa to start funding innovation hubs so that you get these agents, Māori and Pacific agents, who can make things, who are supported to make things that we will eventually use. The next case study is exhibitions. So this is, the other one was media, invest in media, and invest in media production. This one is about how new media can find new ways to tell Indigenous stories, especially Māori ways of telling stories, understanding stories, incredibly spiritual concepts, esoteric concepts. How do we tell that? So we've got our, this is our natural history exhibition that is currently in development. It won't be opening until March next year, but I've been allowed to share some ideas with you. On this project, it's mostly a natural history and science collections exhibition. So it's using all of our natural history specimens, but with a very strong thread of Mātauranga Māori. And Mātauranga Māori is the name for Māori knowledge systems. So I've got a curator in this project, a really wonderful man called Brad Harmy, who is driving the presence of Mātauranga Māori within this project. And one of the difficult challenges for Brad is trying to understand, like I was saying earlier, how do you incorporate very complex spiritual and esoteric concepts into a science exhibition and not make it look like here is all the wonderful science stuff and over there is the frou-frou fairy Māori stuff. We wanted it very much integrated and complementary as opposed to competing. So we want to find new interpretation vehicles for Indigenous knowledge. And one of the most complex concepts to talk about is our concept of mauri. Mauri is a belief that every living thing has this innate living force, but even things that aren't living, aren't alive, like stones, rocks, etc., those can have their own mauri. It's a belief that mauri can be transferred from one person to the other. It can be shifted. It can be disrupted. It is the thing, the seat of your emotions, the seat of your connection with all the beings in the universe. So it's very, I mean, a whole kind of year-long conference could be done just on the concept of Māori. And this was what the exhibition team and Brad came up with. So a central structure using projections. Above is the Sky Father, and below is the Earth Mother. And it's the connections between those two that create Māori. And so this is the explanation. As you enter the unique Aotearoa space, your eye is caught by beautiful digital imagery swirling on large, high, curved, translucent screen. The whole thing seems to fill the exhibition space with beauty and light. You notice the imagery moves and grows in response to the gestures of the visitors, so visitor participation, standing at a round table below, which seems to have roots into the floor. The imagery begins low down on the screens and then spreads upwards, reminding you of fish shoals in the ocean, birds taking flight, or healthy trees reaching for the light. So this was all about the Māori understanding that within a healthy ecosystem, you have boundless Māori that can grow, and it operates between the Sky Father and the Earth Mother. Very, very complex, and it has the danger of looking a little bit like Celtic fairies if you let it get away on you. But I think the design team have done a really good job. So this is, again, what I still consider media, even though it's very much construction-based, physical-based, but it has the projection element to it. But it's trying to find new ways to transmit Māori knowledge, ontologies, epistemologies. How do we make sure that this stuff is told beyond what we used to do in the 20th century, which would be probably a little bit hokey now. Just a few more images. This is just how our design team tries to put together these ideas. The next case study is looking at digital media allowing to create nuanced narratives within an exhibition. When you examine an exhibition, again, I'm talking very much as a practitioner, there are limitations within an exhibition, and one is the amount of information you can use to transmit your ideas. In exhibitions, the value of your information is limited, well, not the value, the amount of information is limited by your label. So you got your label, you can have it that, or you can have enormous labels. People usually deride and despise exhibitions that have too much text in them because visitors will not stop to read it. But what digital labels now allow us to do is to load up layers of information that the visitor can self-select. Of course, this is nirvana for curators because curators are all about getting as much information into the person as possible, whereas other exhibition makers are like, people aren't going to read it. They're not going to read it. They have the attention span of a goldfish. But we're finding that the visitors are really picking up on it. So what I've got here is a co-created exhibition that I've worked on with the tribe back in New Zealand called Rongo Whakaata. So we have a project in Te Papa, which is what we call an iwi in residence, or tribe in residence within Te Papa. And every 3 years we change that tribe. And it's the opportunity to co-create an exhibition with a community to tell their story. So the museum is trying to be as light-handed as possible, as give it a light touch as possible, that we help shape the exhibition, but we are not the voice of the exhibition. The voice is given to Rongo Whakaata in this instance. So this is the beginning of one of the exhibition areas. Right here, we use screens and recorded a welcoming ritual by Rongo Whakaata that was made and composed specifically for the show. So a visitor would stand here and you would get words of welcome from the Rongo Whakaata tribal members. And up here is a black and white image of a historical welcoming by Rongo Whakaata ancestors. So that was one, and then completely opposite was a series of images that show the landscape from which Rongo Whakaata originate. So they don't actually come from Wellington. Their tribal homeland is around about a 5-hour drive north away from Wellington, and the landscape is incredibly different. So we commissioned a filmmaker and photographers to go and capture scenes of the Rongo Whakaata territory so that when visitors go into this exhibition, you, in a sense, immersed in the welcoming words and the welcoming land of Rongo Whakaata. The other thing, like I was alluding to earlier, is the use of digital labels. So this is the first time I've worked in an iwi exhibition where we've used digital labels. For the most part, the past iwi exhibitions have been very analog based, very what I would consider quite a traditional exhibition structure. But for Rongo Whakaata, the concept for the show was that they are the innovators, they are creators. So we wanted to make sure that a lot of tech was included in the show, but as long as the tech provided something useful. And in particular for this object here, which is an ancestral carving, well, carving of an ancestral figure. So we have a lot of ancestral reverence within Māori culture. We're constantly referring to our ancestors. And one of the important ways that they're depicted is in carvings such as this. And here, right beside it, one of the things to note too is that we try to avoid using cases for these figures, because when they're in their original context in our carved houses, they're actually just standing there in the middle of the house. Everybody goes up and touches them and greets them. So here, even though it's a very precious object, we try to keep it as uncased and open to the visitor as possible. We've had a few kind of silly things happen, like people draping over it and trying to take a photo, like they're taking a photo at Disneyland with Mickey Mouse or something stupid like that. But the whole thing is about how do we represent, how do we make sure that these objects are presented in the way that is familiar to Māori, because this is a very decontextualized experience. And then over here is a digital platform that we created, and we recorded a number of different Rongo Whakaata people talking about the history of this man and also talking about the history of his ancestors. So rather than having one mono kind of type voice in a label, this allows us to create a very nuanced and complicated representation or even a narrative of that particular ancestor. It was very successful, and what is even better is that when you develop this type of product, it can actually transfer quite easily back to the museum that is local to Rongo Whakaata, so we can share information with them, share end products. All they would need is just another screen. Another thing that media can help us do is privileging the Rongo Whakaata tribal history over settler history. And this was the whole thing around decolonization, how to make sure that the tribal story is given preeminence over the colonial story. And one very important story to Rongo Whakaata is the encounter with Captain James Cook, or who was called in 1769 Lieutenant James Cook, the captain of the Endeavour. So when he was travelling, when Captain Cook was travelling around New Zealand, Rongo Whakaata's tribal territory was the first place that he disembarked off his ship and went ashore. And that encounter was actually incredibly violent. Yet in European narratives and European histories, the interpretation of that encounter, it's almost very similar to what you see in America when, the cops are shooting members of the black community and, he was an aggressor, we thought he had a gun. When you go back and you read the sailors' versions of the very violent encounter that happened in 1769 and subsequent interpretations of that, it's very much the same thing. The European sailors, they misinterpreted there was a very aggressive approach by Māori. But what was happening was that the Māori were doing a ritual challenge to ascertain whether or not you were friend or foe. So we come out and we hand down a challenge where we're acting very, you would have seen it with their haka boys, like that, and they look like they're about to knock your head off. And what they're doing is that they're testing to see whether you're going to try and attack or are you going to come in friendship. So they were using the cultural information, the cultural rituals that world understood. But when the Europeans saw that, they just saw aggression. This, of course, was not helped with an earlier encounter that Abel Tasman, much earlier in this, about 20 years earlier or so, I think, that his crew were actually killed by a group who were doing the same thing. They were coming out to test whether you're friend or foe. But regardless, this was our chance to tell the Rongo Whakaata story. So we engaged a Rongo Whakaata animator who is a professor of animation up in Auckland, and gave him a brief and told him, create the encounter, but call it from the shore, not from the boat. You are going to recreate the story of your own people, and we're going to use the tribal narratives, which we're very lucky to have. And it was an incredibly successful product, really. It was an incredibly successful thing to make in this exhibition. So when I called this presentation making new nets, a new net goes fishing, it actually comes from a proverb that we've got called ka pū te ruha, ka hau te rangatahi. The old net is redundant, therefore the new net will go fishing. So that's what I again perceive media to do. And just to conclude the whole rongo whakaata case study, I'm just going to show you a small clip of some children playing in the light of a projection that we created specifically for the exhibition. We wanted to make sure that children felt very included. We wanted a kind of a lighter touch in the central promenade of the exhibition. And this is the clip that we created. And we've also you've got light projections and also commissioned music that we brought in from a rongo whakaata musician, Tama Waipara. I'll just show you. It also includes my daughter. That's my daughter. Okay, so I call that the new net because the future of museums in New Zealand will be, our visitation will be primarily brown people. The younger generation within New Zealand are going to be mostly made up of Pacific Island, Asian and Māori people. And so we need to be developing media that responds directly to them, because if we don't, we're going to be making media for people who are going to be too old to attend the museum. So it's all about future-proofing visitation, while at the same time trying to find new strategies and solutions for Māori audiences today. Finally, I want to talk about Māori developers outside of the museum. So I am always on the lookout, as I said, for new creators, new ideas, but especially people who are making these things, making new things for audiences outside the museum. Because if you remember, we're only attracting 9% of the Māori population, but they're still out there and they still want these kinds of experiences. So I find that guys like this, like the man that I've got in front of you, are making those things to reach the people that we can't. So this is a profile of a small startup company called Arataki Cultural Walking Trails. They actually come from my hometown, Tauranga, and they've created technology and an app to help go and take Māori stories, replant Indigenous stories of the landscape back over the landscape for people to listen to. So they're developing it for a non-Māori audience, but Māori are using it as well. But I've got a clip here of Lee, who's the central guy there. These guys are actually my relations as well, which also helps, of Lee talking about his product. Oh, this is the landing page of their website. And if you want to find out more, that's their web address there. I really wanted to use this particular talk to help profile new ideas that are coming through. So I asked Lee, when I got Kusara's invitation, would you like me to talk about your project? And he was stoked. So take note.
I'm the CEO and founder of Arataki Cultural Trails. We have developed New Zealand's first proximity-based cultural content delivery platform. On a global scale, there's not enough Indigenous information available to non-Indigenous people. We came up with a digital method to be able to tell our stories. Because it is proximity-based, you actually have to be physically at that location to unlock that information using things like GPS, geofencing and also Bluetooth beacon technology to release content when you're in locations. We're at a point now where we're ready to scale up, which for us means spreading our networks around New Zealand so that you'll be able to use the Arataki app to consume or engage with literally hundreds, if not thousands, of culturally significant sites around New Zealand.
So when I asked Lee if I could use his material in this presentation, I told him that I saw what he was doing so incredibly important because it was an exercise in decolonization, which is taking out the colonial layer of information, the colonial mediation between ourselves and our stories, or ourselves and the land. And so what Arataki Cultural Trails was doing was replacing all of that Indigenous information on the landscape, things to do with our place attachment, things to do with our ancestral stories, but taking it to a landscape that is outside of a museum. It's a museum without walls, which I find this kind of stuff incredibly exciting. And while we could use it in the museum, I actually want to support it to be used outside. And I wanted to share what their vision was for their project: to bridge the cultural gap between communities, sharing our cultural stories with as many people as possible. So this is about inclusive storytelling, but making sure that the authors of the story that you're listening to are Indigenous. And that is the material point, the change that is starting to happen within museums who deal with Indigenous people. The museum has to take themselves out of that narrative and be strong enough to provide a platform for the stories that have not been told. So just to summarize what I think new media can offer, and to summarize my presentation, I know I keep banging on about decolonization, but I'm pretty fierce about it. It is a chance to decolonize authorship in museums by introducing new ideas by Māori creators and by prioritizing Māori narratives over settler narratives. Those narratives could almost be very similar. They might only have very subtle differences, but the difference in this, even if it is subtle, is still critical to make sure that the authorship is given back to Indigenous people. So sharing authority with Indigenous people as media curators and as curators in a museum, I think this is such an important challenge for everyone. The other thing that media can offer to us, to diversify and to share the editorial voice heard in and out of museums. And by doing that, you're complicating and enriching the community presence, not just within your institution, but also external. Because remember, with me, most of my people are not in the museum. So I have to make sure that if I find things that are working, how do I push it out? To encourage and foster research dialogue between Māori communities and museums through social media engagement. Now, this does require the person to go out of themselves, to abandon your museum identity somewhat, because I find, especially with my people, they tend to trust and want to share information with you as an individual rather than you as the institution. So this could be a way for curators to actually start to declare themselves and their place within their communities and use that as a way to get them to trust you. It becomes reciprocal. What new media can offer, it can help find new ways to present Indigenous ontologies and taxonomies in exhibitions. My people have had a different way of viewing, especially the natural world, and it's very difficult to get that view and validate it and give it the presence it requires in natural history museums. But the new media that's coming through and new ways of thinking, especially, which I think is even more important, is helping to complicate again the narrative around how we think. One of the things is to create fresh appeal to Māori audiences, especially young people who are the future museum supporters, the future museum goers, the future museum consumers. If we do not start trying to figure out how to be relevant to the children and the young people who are coming to the museum, and especially ones who just feel like they've been dragged there by a school trip, if we don't create points of relevancy for these younger audiences, we are going to be creating very detached and very dispirited adult museum goers. So we must be always thinking about how new media can be reaching out to them and giving the museum greater appeal. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. I'm so incredibly honoured to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pawai, for your presentation. Now we still have some 10 minutes for sharing and questions. So any of you have question or want to share some idea with her, so you're very welcome. ก็มีเวลาประมาณสัก10 นาทีนะครับสำหรับคำถามหรืออยากจะแลกเปลี่ยนกับผู้อภิปรายนะครับเรียนเชิญครับมีไหมฮะยกมือได้เลยนะครับ So you can raise your hand if you want to share or you have some questions. The microphone will go to you. No? Really? Okay. Microphone, please. ตรงนี้ครับ
You said that you did a lot of experiment, right? Can you explain a little bit more or give me a more example?
Experiment, sorry?
Yeah, you said that you've done many experiments and you failed.
Yeah, my experimenting was primarily with me trying to be brave enough to go out with social media. We have a code of conduct within the museum, and also to manage your online persona. So I experimented primarily with that by testing with different audiences to see what relationship and what dialogue I could get back for my World War I research. For me, that was a type of experiment. But we also have user experience people within the museum who do testing, UX testing with audiences as we develop new technologies. So we've got those positions that are in the exhibition, as well as people that we call experienced designers who are also testing with different audiences. I'm afraid I couldn't speak about them because I don't know a heck of a lot about UX, but they are there doing probably much more fantastic experimenting than me, which was just trying not to get in trouble with the museum.
มีตรงนี้ด้วยครับ
Hi. My name is Hathairat Estrella Muntian. I'm a museum planner. Thank you for sharing your work. It's very inspiring. And in my work, I try to bring in more participatory approach to museum exhibition. But what I found is that my colleagues, like curators, are not familiar with the idea of open up themselves. They're still very much trying to hold their power or authorities of creating a narrative to put in a museum text war. So my question is, how do you encourage your colleague, or how do you become interested in more participatorial curatorship? And how do you have some tip for me? Thank you.
Yeah, it requires an enormous culture shift within museums. I'm lucky that Te Papa, when it was established, was created on a foundation of much more community inclusion and participation than other museums. So we had a good base, but there are still a lot of curators within my institution who prefer to work with I call it the Western model, where the curator is God. The curator is the God of the museum. I say, I do. I think it's quite generational as well, in my experience. The older the curator, the more inclined they are to think about that, curating that way. But what I've been trying to do is a series of checks and balances. One, at a managerial level, to constantly go back to that curator, especially one that I might manage, and go, what have you done for community engagement? What have you done? Where I can see you doing this content development. Have you talked to this person? So you need a couple of checks and balances at managerial level. I'm trying to create a peer review panel within the museum where the peer review, so it's not hierarchical, but it's the people around you who are charged with these ideals that we must make sure that everything developed by the museum or the projects have been explored for relationship building, for relationship platforming, or what we call mana taonga, which is the connection between people and the objects. So the peer review group then creates additional pressure on that curator to get them to think that way. And then finally, we have the management net, which makes sure that it goes back and it looks at all the recommendations from the direct manager, the peer review panel, and then they go in and they say, this is not going to get approved. Go back and do that. You haven't followed up on this recommendation. So it sounds a little bit bureaucratic, but I think it's better to change a culture by doing checks and balances as opposed to expecting people to change the way they think immediately. And sometimes relationships can't be built for particular content as well. Sometimes there are no communities attached to something that a curator is working on, but you still want them to think in a very holistic manner about how can my story affect or be affected by something that's happening in the community. And it might even that it's not about connecting it to family group or tribal group. It may be that you just want them to connect to a group of scientists to make sure that what they're doing is in step with another project happening outside. So it's, if you can set up those multi-layer kind of little safety nets for your people, you'll be onto a good thing. Yeah.
มีใช่ไหมมีไหมครับมีคำถามหรืออยากแลกเปลี่ยนไหมครับ Any more sharing? Okay.
Hi, my name is Kwan from Ripley's Believe It or Not, Pattaya.
Wow.
We are a museum.
Gotta come visit.
You mentioned about social media engagement, and you did a very brave thing is to use your personal or private Facebook account. How do you cope with the responses?
Oh yeah.
Do your research. You do it personally, or how do you allocate your time?
Yeah, so I was working pretty much around the clock during that project because I was getting responses from around the world all the time. And what would happen is that there was I feel obliged to have a bit of a reciprocal relationship with anybody I'm asking to get information from. I don't want it to be merely an extractive exercise. So what would happen is I would work with that person who was contacting me over my messenger saying, I've got this koro or this grandfather. And I would say, right, you let me find out what information I can get for you from the archival end, and then we'll exchange information. So they would give me amazing stories of their grandfather as civilians, people who were dealing with trauma, and I would create a narrative based on what the archives were saying because they're quite difficult for a civilian to decode, and we would just exchange. It was very intense though. It was an intense period. I did a lot of checking in with peers just to make sure that it wasn't getting too personal. Some of the, could get a little bit shady. But I was lucky I wasn't trolled or anything like that. People were incredibly sharing and lovely, and I've maintained those relationships to this day. So I'm not sure, I think that was specific to the Gallipoli project. I haven't yet come across another project I would deploy that strategy, but it was really good to know that it could work really well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm afraid that we have no time to go further because it's almost 10:30 already. So I'm so sorry for those who still have questions and sharing. You can share and ask her afterwards. So thank you so much, Paul, for sharing with us. Your presentation was so very fantastic to me. Thank you so much. Right. Now we're gonna have a wee break for coffee and tea. And then we'll come back for another presentation, another keynote speech at 10:45. So please come back at 10:45. Coffee and tea is on this floor, on the fourth floor. So you can use your, I think in your bag you have a blue card, a blue coupon. You can use that coupon for the blue one for coffee break and for lunch as well. Thank you so much. ก็พักเบรก15 นาทีนะครับผมก็มีกาแฟอยู่ที่ชั้น4เนี่ยนะครับใช้คูปองสีฟ้าที่อยู่ในกระเป๋านะครับผมแล้วกลับมาตอน 10:45 ครับขอบคุณครับ
Good morning, or how we say it in my country, Grüß Gottle, which is a Swabian expression coming from the area in Germany where I'm coming from. Thank you very much to have the pleasure to give here a short or rough overview about what I did so far in digital media. And yeah, we'll see what's going on with it. Today, when we are talking about digital media or talking about museums, it's mostly to talk about his hidden treasures. Because museums, from the classical view, in the loop to collect and to preserve and to present objects, artifacts. This mostly is done all over the world with engaged people which are positive thinking and always having in mind that this museum is a unique one and mostly are involved in this task day and night, and always it's, so far as I saw from many museums, it's not all the time really structured. It's full of on-demand requests. So we have to do this, or we have to do that, or we have to look for a new way of preservation for this or that. And that's mostly giving the museums, we call it in Germany, it's a gather of chicks. So they are running around, they are doing something. They are not totally sure that it is the right way or it will be the right way, but it's always with the best positive input to get the best out of it. So right now, what you collect during this work is that you collect a lot of knowledge, but this knowledge is in your head. So what I'm always saying, if you go to a museum and you will see an artifact or something, the best what can be happened is if a curator is standing beside you and telling something about it. Because the real story of each object is in the background. The real story of the object is maybe a combination between two objects or more artifacts. And there is coming up a storyline which gives you an impression about the cultural aspect, about the cultural part, and about a combination what was happened in the past, and maybe also give a few out views what will be happened in the future. So it's a learning and interactive flow which has happened inside museums. And that's the real advantage, at least. With techniques, we are getting in the last years, we are having the ability to do nearly everything. But we doesn't develop the workflow for it. We doesn't develop at least how to implement and how to do it right. That's where sometimes if you see some things in the newspaper, which is becoming a competitor in a few ways of museums. So if you are talking about the social media, what we hear from the Tepapa, it is becoming a competition between this information which is presented in the public, television, new media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, which is a fast media, and the classical media, which is presented inside museums. So the role right now doesn't match completely. But museum can utilize these techniques to become a successful exhibition and to become a successful development. And that's mostly is these slides I would like to show you right now. As a vision, normally, if you step into a museum or into a museum right now, is a little bit, it depends always. Maybe it's frustrating because sometimes something is not working as you expect. So you are going inside the museum, doing this, doing that, and maybe you have the chance during a coffee break to talk with your colleagues about it. On a vision, that was understanding from my side, you're stepping into a museum with a big smile on your face, being proud to be a partner inside the museum. And when you step in, you directly get a get a feed or you get news from the processes and you see what's going on during the night in other museums which you are collaborating with, and what you can learn from them and how to share it. So it means that your whole workflow each day will be a communication workflow. So everything what you are doing, you are sharing in a style that it's always giving a feedback and getting a feedback from other aspects which you combine with your work right now. So if you have a question, you simply can post it and you get an answer on it, or it will be an open discussion how to do it. Right now, as I saw in a few museums also in Southeast Asia, that means in Jakarta, for example, is that the main topic, for example, in the National Museum in Jakarta was we need water for restoration. But in the room where the restoration should be done, there is no water. So how to handle it? And it was really amazing to see how they organize it, how they finding side passes to combine it. But at least it also describes a situation which is really happened in a lot of museums right now. By utilizing new media, new techniques, which is giving with total technique development, you are having the ability to preserve footsteps. Footsteps, from my understanding, means it's a footstep from the visitor, because the visitor is our client. And if a visitor steps into the museum and seeing artifacts, he is leaving footsteps because he's talking about it. This information, this particular information between visitors discussing aspects in the museum would be perfect to be rebinded to the development of the museum so that you see the direct feedback on it so that you can develop your own content. It means also a new style of collaboration is needed. The collaboration doesn't stops at the situation that the museum is developing his content or an exhibit, permanent, temporary, on the road or whatever. It starts normally that it's an overall collaboration. So the overall collaboration means each exhibition, each new step is a follow-up on the last one. So it's always a long life learning excursion where you get the ability to store your thoughts, also your mistakes and your successes for the future. And that, if you are doing it right, then you do it really precise and it's binded somehow in a digital backend system inside the museum so that you can have a review on it. One major aspect of this is stories as a style. When we built the Jewish Museum in Berlin in 1999 up to 2001, we had the pleasure to meet up with a guy from the US Holocaust Memorial, which was Scheike Weinberg, the first director there. And the story of this director was pretty simple. He always was stepping to each curator inside the museum and telling people like story. Tell story. That's the way how to show a culture, how to get understanding, how to get respect and to get tolerance about aspects of the culture. This small word, tell stories, is a huge story because it's not easy to tell stories because you have to search for it, you have to find it. And normally, or what I saw so far, not each curator is able to tell stories. Everybody, each curator really is having stories. But there is not an implemented way to store it, to get it as a knowledge of the museum. Because mostly it's a curator, he knows, okay, that and this was happened with this artifact. But that's my knowledge, and if somebody is asking me, I will tell you. But you have no place where you can put it. The second one is the sounding, which means the overall communication aspect of a museum, how the museum is recognized by the public. That means the sounding, how the museum is interacting with people, with your clients, the visitors, with the media and so on. That at least all means together sounding. Each story is telling a small part of your overall theme. The sounding itself is the combination between all stories. At least if you are pretty in luck, if somebody is hearing a story, he will recognize that has to come from this and this particular museum. Then you are really in luck, because then the museum is becoming a branding. This branding aspect, or it means at least what I also heard from you, from the Te Papa, is at least the logos, the name, and all this stuff is a brand. And we really have to think about these marketing issues when we are talking about museums. Because each museum, the knowledge and the respect about what this museum is doing is a brand. And this brand must be communicated in each way you can find. When we are starting on museums, normally we are always talking about artifacts, about objects which are inside the collection of a museum. As an example, this here is my artifact. But as we already know, this artifact is having different dimensions. So we have a human dimension because it's a part of a culture. We have stories around these artifacts, we have a time dimension, and we have a location dimension. It means at least each object, each artifact at least contains several dimensions on which ways this object can be found. So at least if you are in luck, you can search about locations, and you will find a bunch of artifacts and objects, including the stories. At least our clients or our visitors are completely different. Everybody have his favorite. So everybody of us know if you are searching something which is only in your mind, how to search for it. The best example is if you are searching for artifacts where you don't know the name. For example, if you go to a supermarket and you buy a can of milk, you put it on the band, and there you have a stick where you can separate your stuff from the other stuff from the client behind you. There is no name for this stick. So if you think this stick is inside the database, how to search for it? Which keyword you should use? So that means, for example, stories or location. Okay, location can be a supermarket, and somehow inside this supermarket you will find somehow this little stick, and then maybe you are in luck and you find the right name for it. That means these are all dimensions where you have to get data from and where you have to store data from. And that's the magic in a museum, how to organize these steps. From the museum's development, at least, it's always starting with a big question: who are we? And what's our role and our association? A museum right now, and that was mostly the problem I saw in the museums in Europe, where I will give you a few examples later on, was, on the one hand, the museum is unique. The museum always is focusing. We are a unique museum. We present this and that, and we are not communicating about it. When we had the chance with the first websites for museum, every museum is saying, if we put this inside the net, inside the web, nobody will come to our museum because you can visit in the net. So that's bullshit. Why we should do it? We can say, okay, we have an opening hour, 8 to 8 or 8 to 5. On Monday we are closed because we have a few internal stuff, and that it is. But we cannot present our stuff outside the museum itself. At least the success was presented outside, but bind it so that it will become more attraction to visit the museum. So to use the internet or to use the media which is available on network technologies as a feed your people, feed your visitors, and feed your interested partners. And that's the main topic on it. Scope, segments, and communications was always focusing on the fact that inside museums you have workers which are doing restoration stuff, you have curators which are having the overview of a collection or of a segment of a collection. But at least the main problem I saw was always that these different departments, each individual department is having its own language. There is no, I do not know why, but there is no direct or specific communication between these departments. If a person which is in charge for restoration task, they are really, it looks like sometimes they are really living in a different world. If you are talking with a director and this guy or this lady is explaining what she is doing, the director is always mostly looking, what is my visitor number today, and is it respected, and is it growing, or however. And I do not understand why this restoration part is so important. Everything is in the exhibit, so what's happened? So somehow handle it. But at least a museum is needed that these tasks all is somehow connected. And there's a new media or the digitalization is stepping in, because then you can get an overview and you can get a transparency. And this transparency doesn't mean only to give the information. It's always or also to give a clearance on the work. That means a full transparency what the hell these guys are doing and what these guys are doing and how we can connect. Because also this restoration is part of the story later on. This stuff, what there is happened, has to become a part of the storytelling later on, because that is important, okay? And there are several techniques, which I will explain a little bit, or a few aspects about it, how to get this transparency done or initiated, let's say in this way. Normally, it's always about blueprint, artifacts, metadata, and soundings. That always means it starts all over, always with what is my vision. And this vision really is an important discussion, because this vision, how a museum should look like or how a museum should develop, is an important discussion, especially if you are talking about digital media and if you are talking about digitalization inside a museum, because it has to stay for more than 10 years. The life cycle of a media right now in our new world is about 2 years at least. So every 2 years we have a complete new hardware, we have a complete new software, we have a complete or nearly a complete new way of communication. That's why it's really important to think about it. Also from the design, which have to match, there I will give you a few overview about what it means from the design. That means from the infrastructure, from the applications, and also from the data handling. It all goes together with a visitor flow. Visitor flow is not only internally inside the museum. It also means that a visitor normally is leaving the museum, and the best what the museum can do, they are having still, if they are talking about the museum, a few artifacts in the head and talking about this. So the story is also beyond the museum. So it's coming over there. As a case study, maybe we can use this here. It was a realization for a multi-user installation. It means we have here in the middle a main projection, and around this main projection a lot of media station was established. It is a temporary exhibition which was sent through all in Germany, so it was taking place in several cities to explain what it means to be a refugee or to be an immigrant or to be a migrant. So that was all the stories. The main concept about it was how to visualize it, because migration, immigration, or banished people is a kind of feeling. There is something happened with these humans. There is something happened with our community or our society, and how to integrate it later on. So the main aspect was not at least this technical stuff. It was at least that the installation itself would like to invite you to communicate. So the main aspect was, let the visitor communicate about information. For the information, mostly we use oral history styles. So that means simply stories coming with a ship going here or whatever. And how they feel, because these humans, these subjects are becoming an objects of playing with political issues from here and there, and that is the main topic which is making a lot with your feelings. So the main stuff was to have such a screen. When you saw on the last screen this media station, every of this media station, in this example it was 4 terminals where you can call information, but each information will be displayed on a wall projection, so you can see what your neighbor in the moment is doing, and that's the style we would like to invite your neighbor and your people to communicate about it, to see something, so it's to be triggered. Okay, so it means maybe this guy here is simply looking for lodge, where this here was happened. Okay, was a manufacturer of textile, okay, in 80th century, and was coming, where is Lodge here? Was coming from here, but on the same time we would like to connect it, for example, with Böhmen, which is a different area in Europe or in Germany, and with the Balticum, which is here. And all the time this background projection is changing, so that during the time you are reading or you are hearing the information from one aspect you choose, you also will be served with other information which is related or not related with this, but also showing more aspects. That was the way here, how we tried to open up a little bit the space, so that it's not particular happened here or it's not particular happened here. So it's a flow which has happened during this time in the whole Europe, and which is partly also coming again right now. So it's always a story which is going on. So the scope for it was see related, discuss and communicate. But during this time, we were not able to store the feedbacks. So the visitor interaction and the comments and the remarks from the visitor were only stored on an analog way. So at the end of the exhibit, there was a question mark to get a reporting and to use this reporting later on to do further development on the content. So something was unclear. So it was also as a style to look for a way how we can enrich our knowledge about the needs or the understandable information we present, and what would be a topic for further information. That I found, and from my point of view, that is really important always to talk with the visitor. A different installation when we are talking about digital scenography is this here. Digital scenography is a at least means all. So if you step inside a museum, how the museum welcomes you, how the museum is talking with you, and how the museum is giving you aspects or views, feelings, and whatever. This installation here, for example, is a full installation with a wall projection and floor projection. So if you are talking, it was an exhibition about climate, and you can step here simply to the Ice Age. On the Ice Age, the floor here will become ice. So if you step on it, okay, it will crack. Okay, and that was the way to involve the people, to give an impression how it can look like. But it's always, also on this one, a few museums directors in Germany were talking about this exhibition or this temporary installation, that's Mickey Mouse, because it was a kind of, yeah, it's playing around, okay? It was really attractable. We get especially a lot of young visitors to go there and to play with it, and they really have fun to jump on the ice or to slow down the water side, and it's really splashing and you can hear it. But the combination at least, and the story was at least to tell some aspects about the Ice Age, climate change, and such other stuff. And it really was in their minds, they understood it. So the feedback with these groups was with pictures, so they can paint the pictures about the visit, and they really get the understanding what we are talking about it. But the way was only a real storytelling. It was simply aspects from the Ice Age, how we found it in the research, okay? The main problem on the research is that the research is, and the presenting as a story is also a possible way to manipulate something. And in a world where we found a lot of fake news, or where nobody can say that is real, it's not real, it's a myth, real or whatever, partly real or whatever, that's really complex. But museums, at least, is a host where you can find really qualified information. But the network itself, there is no certification. So the post, which we saw from Te Papa, is a post on Facebook. But it's the same post like you see sometimes also from political side, which is really not true. So how to decide which is a real information and which is not a real information? That we cannot only do by like or unlike. That will not work. Okay, so a story from our side and the emancipational process from our side is needed, how we qualify data and how we ensure that this data is a real one. It's a researched one, it's a validated one, and if you go back to the books or to the library, you will find the same results. And that is really a key topic where we are always talking museums is a host of treasury. So there are really treasures, and most of these treasures and most of these stories are hidden. So we have to find and we have to use new ways to bring it to the front, to illustrate it and to make it available for visitors and also for ourselves, which means for the museum's development itself. Activities to become this digital scenographic, where the scenographic always means the internal flow, the external flow, and the installation, which means if you step into the museum, what is your feeling, how you can explore objects, how you can find your information, and which will attract you, and will there be a guide or will there not be a guide, and all this stuff. It normally starts all with this small one, this blueprint. On a blueprint, we understand that it is a strategy of mediation, because inside the museum you have a lot of information as I saw, simply written in books, in cards, in papers. Okay? So later on, this information have to be transferred to a digital format. But how to do it? And how to figure out this data is also data, or must it be extended, and how to extend it. That's in the beginning always a discussion about my blueprint or my strategy for mediation. Mediation always means what is my vision for the future, how we would like to interact, which collaboration partner we have, and how it should look like. During the Jewish Museum, and that was really funny to meet you yesterday, was always, we got a deputy director from the Tepapa, this was Ken Gorby. And Ken Gorby really was sitting in the museum and giving a lot of notes and speeches about Tepapa, how they did in Tepapa, because Tepapa, so far as I know, was one of the first museums which are not only talking about the history and the present time, which are trying to give a projection in the future. And that was really new, because the Jewish Museum, for example, is a museum which is not talking about the Holocaust, which is a different big theme in Germany, but the museum is not a Holocaust museum, it's a museum about Jewish culture. And Jewish culture was an embedded part of the German culture. And a lot of these aspects of Jewish culture in Germany were killed during the regime of the National Socialist Party, that means Adolf Hitler and all the other, which try simply to kill this culture. And that's the real mess was happened during this time, to try actively to kill a part of a culture, so that the culture is simply not longer part of the culture of Germany. And that is really a big, or was a big topic. So all discussions were happened during this time about visions of the future, how to establish it. And you can see it today in the museums. There is a void, and the void is a non-touchable area, where the non-touchable area simply described something is lost. Okay, there is no description about it, it's simply lost, and there cannot be a cable, there cannot be a power plug or whatever. It's simply an area which is silent and dark, that's all. Okay, and the museum's focus is to fill at least more and more, to bring more light what is lost and to enrich the collection. But the void still is there, because also the museum never can fulfill it. Next is how the media should be presented. That means media didactic scenographic. You can see it a little bit, and I will show it later on a little bit precise or more detailed. Is you have several actions or several sections on the screen, but sometimes it's enough simply to have a photo. The first initial concept was a museum's flow or visitor flow, where each visitor which is going to the museum can have a registration, and by your birth year you will get a virtual guide. And this virtual guide is taken out from the collection and is a historical person which all the time will clip you content when you walk through the exhibition. But we don't follow up, because it was during this time, it was 2001. 2001 was no Facebook. So it was simply this style of integration or of technique which we have to use during this time, and we learned rapidly that something new also is coming on. From technical, oops, that was the wrong button. From technical, always it's a question how we build it up. There we have normally 3 to 4 big areas. One is the backend. That means the infrastructure inside the museum. The second one is the front end, which means the exhibition room. The third one is the application for visitors and for the back end, how to control and how to maintain. These are the main 5 aspects you have to fill if you are talking about your vision and what it should be at the end. Each of these parts totally must be separated. Don't mix it. If you mix it, you will lose your focus. At least what it means is software for doing this digitalization inside museum is needed. So modular databases and modular multimedia always means you have several steps. You have the import, because you have, as we talked already, it's archive, it's collection. There are such a lot of tasks inside the museum, and somehow you have to migrate all this data into a system, where system describes that you can search systematic and you can find systematic. So you see, if you search for an object, you directly see these tasks are going on preservation, this one is going on restoration. The object is a loan to a different museum. Here are my folios for the insurances, all this stuff. So that means at least all this data has to go in a backend system, including photos, including keywords, including videos, including oral history and all this stuff, which means at least a lot from infrastructure. And to have this infrastructure designed as a modular item, which is only working and which is independent from the application layer. Because if you mix it from the beginning, it will be old in 2 years, because then you have a renewal of software, of operation system and whatever. And if it's all sticking together, you cannot renew it. So you have to work from the beginning with some disadvantages inside the system or whatever. But it's really happened also in the whole world. So in Europe, there are several news groups and discussion groups which are doing nothing else how to handle errors inside these applications, because we cannot renew the system right now. Which is really funny to go in these discussions, because that is always really tractable. The next is media didactic design, which is always combined also with the architecture. That means one is the exhibition design, but it always has to match with the digital design and how to present this stuff, which you see here. And at least to present it inside the exhibition, it means you have a distribution channel. So we are talking in the digital world only about formats. So you have a format for the web, you have a format for the exhibit, you have a format for the social media and whatever. And these formats or this distribution channel can be enriched each time without any problem and without any disadvantage in the current work. And that means at least this modularization where you can go. To keep it short, so you have a basic digital logic, which is subscribed with this small folio. So on the one hand, you simply have an input. Here is doing the output, which means the processing data. And on the third point, you have the output. That is, and it maybe looks a little bit funny, but it's really the key asset of every single IT system. Where is my input? Where is my put? Where is my output? Because you know if you're doing something wrong, oops, it's not working today, why ever? The chick in the middle will be barbecued. That means if something is going wrong in this strategy, which you implement internally inside the museum, then you got simply a grilled chicken Okay, you can enjoy to have this chicken, but you have to start from the beginning. That's the main point. And if some of these areas, that means the input strategy is wrong, the processing strategy, the put is wrong, or the distribution is wrong, then there could be the mistake and the fact that you really have to start from the beginning because it's not working. So this process all the time is an overall process. To have it real technical, it's looking like this. If you look like this is my input, that's my put, this here is my output. All is combined with a database. On this here are my artifacts, each individual artifact. On input, it means you have several media. You have media data, that is the description or the metadata about the media. You have process data, which is, for example, data about restoration task, which is about insurances or whatever. You have exchange section if you are going to collaborate with other museums. They maybe would like to have a look on your catalog and to share about it and to discuss about it. Then you have this one, and you have to know where my data is published, which is really important because museums is always, from the operational view, it's always a talk about money. Where is my funding? Because without the funding, you will not have a museum. Okay, so this part about publishing is really important because if a magazine is using your pictures, it's a copyright stuff. So normally they have to pay for the right to publish it because they get a price for a copy or they get an income about your data. And in the future, I believe that every museum must have a strategy how they can get money out of the content, because this content, and you can always repeat it, is having a value because it's qualified content, it's a research content, it's having simply a lot of stuff which is not somehow faked, it's certified. You can trust this content, so it's up for usage for several others. For example, in Thailand, if you have the tourist sector as one of the biggest economic sectors, museums really, from my understanding, can support them with content, and it's a real content and giving aspects about history. But it's also at the same time a business model. So museums are not only asking for money, they also have to do a step of emancipation and thinking how we can make money. And really, museums can make money with the contents. That's the main asset, and to tell about it. I put it here in slides or in boxes because this media or this section of media must be somehow separated. So don't mix it up. You see it sometimes if you do an inventarization of an artifact and you are putting the date, the created date, or where's or which is the duration when this object is made. How to specify the data. The date, that means the data about the date. Okay, so if you have only the years, you can search for the years. We call it standardization. So each museum have to look on the data and have to talk about standard data and how to share it later on. Because at least collaboration is one of the main aspects for the future. And here we are talking about a standard which is giving from the US mostly. It's called the Dublin Core Standard and the Spectrum Standard. These two standards every museum should respect, because later on you will be able to share parts of media from your museum with other museums, and you can join data or aspects from other museums. With Dublin Core Standards and Spectrum Standards, you are open to do it. That's why this data here is in boxes. Processing always means the intelligence, at least, of data is something like the indexing. That means the artifact to index it by number, by the inventarization number, is not good, because only the curator will find what he is searching for, because he knows the taxonomy of the inventarization numbering. But how to name it? Okay, is this a box? Is that the right name? Is it only box, or is it wooden box, or whatever? So it's a little bit a question that every museum, according to the topics or to the collection he is looking for, you have to look for a standard operation procedure, a SOP, how to standardize your data, how to modelize your data in a way that you will be able, also over generations, because sometimes you have an exchange in the museum's people and somebody is going out and a new one is coming in. They have to know, there must be a follow-up to follow it. And that means always remember the chicken. If you do it not right and not really precise, the chicken will be grilled immediately. Okay, that means these indexes and thesauri. Thesauri at least is giving an overview about families. So also here you can store information about connections, about related objects, which at least is giving you, we call it a compound. So it can be this object. For example, you have a shirt from the mid-age or a textile from the mid-age. One of the key objects which is going to textile exhibitions in Germany is a flare box. Flare box means you have these small bugs which are looking for blood, and every woman during this time was having these small catching boxes. So they have to pick the finger, put a little bit blood inside and hold it on your body. And each of these insects will go into this box. So it's better not to stand all the time this way than to have the flares inside the box. To tell the story from the view of this box is a good one, because you will remind it, at least if you see a mouse or whatever in your locations, then you will be reminded it was also happened during the mid-ages in Germany, especially in Austria. There are a lot of these boxes. And the third part at least is the output, where we are always only talking about formats. So we have formats about HTML5, we have formats about only HTML. We simply don't use techniques or formats which are encapsulated. So for example, if you have Flash as a format, you cannot completely put out your data. You can use scripting technologies and it will work again, but it's complex. The digital strategy, at least, and the challenge about this is my data, at least for the future of the museum, will be my success. So all content and all collection data must be digitalized. For this, we have these several sections. It's a collection management, it's a preservation and restoration research areas, and we really have to put it all together. Exhibit management, visitor information, that also means client research management. We simply have to take care that our clients, our visitors, are happy with us, and we are happy with our visitors, and we have to think how we attract, how to keep them to come here, and how to think. It's always depending on this strategy I have talked before. So how to set up, this is my strategy in the web, if I choose the web for being a marketing instrument. But that's a major step, to see it as a marketing instrument, simply to feed your visitors and to bring it inside the museum, to give them information, send them back, getting feedback, and then getting a life cycle of information. and about certification of the visitor. Next also is social media, and it's called reports. So not a lot of museums are using right now reports. It means if you have a post in Facebook or whatever, is it shared? Is it who shared it? In which forum shared it? Maybe I have to reject it so that I can control it. And a big topic is also the copyright. So museums right now, if you think my content is my value, then you also, on the same time, you have to think it's a copyright issue. I have to take care that my pictures I put inside the web are protected somehow, protected in a way that I know where it is published, where it's placed, so I can trace it. Okay, I can look, it's published here, or it's abuse, for example, so that you can do something about it. So it means at least it's a real emancipational process. You have to work with it, and you have to go with it. And it also means it really enriches the world of museum work. And you cannot expect simply by having a small talk with a team inside the museum, and you can say, okay, we have to do marketing or we have to do social media. Who is using social media or Facebook? Then you are in charge to do the social media. That will not work because it's a huge work, and you really should look if you have the ability to have specialized persons for it, which are doing these aspects of social media branding and feeding and all this stuff. So don't put it simply as a job enrichment on one position, because that maybe will kill your experience or your quality of work, which you are already having. So you will not get it without invest. That is the real story about it. Also, what is as a new stuff we found in the Jewish Museum and also in the Zeppelin, which I will explain a little bit preciser, is the fundraising. All these three museums I would like to show you a bit. They are, from budget view, in plus. It means they are getting enough money to run the museum, to run it successful, and to get more money they need. That means they can extend their work, they can do other stuff with the money, because the funny thing is they cannot make benefit. That's forbidden by law in Germany or most of Europe. So they directly have to reinvest the over budget which they are gaining. And that is a really important topic, that you're really talking about fundraising and how to get this financial situation, because each museum and the quality of the museum and the branding of the museum, at least it's always a question of money. Is there money? There is a museum. Is there a lot of money? Then it's a good museum. If there is no money, then it's maybe only a group with a few collectors. Could be. Last topic, but also important, is internal management and social operation standard procedures, where you have to take care, really follow up on your standards. If you don't do it, remember the chicken, you will be barbecued or whatever. Digitalization, at least. The success of it is the way or the level of integration. If it's really a full integrated system and it's a real planning, or it was a real planning stuff, and you really have separated from infrastructure, application and data, then you will be in success, and you have to do it. There is no way not to do it. That's maybe the investment or the respect we have to say about the information technology, which is mostly coming up in the last 20 years. three different museums, three different strategies. The first one is the Zeppelin Museum in Friedrichshafen. Zeppelin Museum in Friedrichshafen is a museum about airships. I learned that it's called ships because a ship is driving, it's not flying. Because it's lighter than air, so it's driving. Okay, the airplane is flying, but a Zeppelin cannot fly. That's only handled with gas. So that's why I like museums, because you really each day you see something new and you get new information. Second one is the Jewish Museum. And the third one is the Reichsengelhorn Museum in Friedrichshafen. The difference is Zeppelin Museum, the financing situation is it's half city-owned and half private. Jewish Museum is government-owned, so it's a central organization directly funded by the German government. And the third one, Reichsengelhorn, is city-financed and having a big donor circle. That is the next. But the biggest museum of these three is the last one, the Reichsengelhorn, with over 1,200 square meters of exhibition place. Zeppelin Museum is installed from 1994 to 1999, opened 1996. It was the first museum followed up by the US Holocaust Memorial, where we are taking over the idea to present videos. So the museum is having a collection of historical videos about development of airships. And there we found a technique to digitalize it. It was in the 90s really a hard work. It was not really easy because we have no codecs, so we have to develop the codecs by ourselves that we simply can play videos. And it's about 400 square meters for permanent exhibition with about 1,500 artifacts. The main idea to bring this museum alive is to build 30% of a real Zeppelin again. That was the way to get the real data about the Zeppelin, because it was really a precise redo of work. So like this Zeppelin, it was developed during the 20s in the 19th century, and they really were precise to have this aluminium in the right place, how to manufacture it and how to combine it so that it will look like the old one. And it's really the old one. You can see the museum was opened in summer. Okay, and this model of a Zeppelin, of a real Zeppelin, you can walk in and you can look around. That we are right with the modeling was that one of the first questions after 2 hours opening time of the museum itself was why the toilet in the Zeppelin is not working. And that was really right, because the Zeppelin toilet was really, it was a model, okay? It was not a full working. But immediately when the visitors are stepping in, they see, oh, it's a toilet, that's good, so I go here. Which also means the toilet is now closed, so there's now a special sign, do not enter here. The media you can see here. It's a really old style. During this time, remember it's nearly 20 years. Was during this time German and English, but it's using the first server-client concept. So it means the museum itself is having an infrastructure. During this time it was Token Ring and Novel. And both of these techniques were donated by the manufacturer. So we got the Token Ring network we got from IBM. All computers we got from IBM, the screens we got from HP, and so on. So the complete technique and infrastructure, and that was the luck of the Zeppelin Museum, were donated by manufacturing companies. And also the museum agreed, okay, we will print out that you are a big sponsor of this museum and please look on it, and so maybe you would also like to have an IBM at your home or whatever. It's simply win-win situation. At the same time, also we find out that articles or artifacts from the museum as models are high attractable, so you really can sell it. So you have a Zeppelin as a balloon or whatever. That's really funny. To have a look inside, you can see this here. This is the main hall. You're coming this way. So here's the entrance, you're going here. This is combining. You have always here these screens. And these screens are already taken the information from the central environment. So from the server is giving this to a token ring network directly. So each video is open to be distributed on each media station. Here in the background you see the ladder where you can walk into the Zeppelin itself. This artifact was a passion, I guess, from the director. Because nobody knows why this car is there. It's a Maybach, and the only stuff what I know is that Maybach Motors, which is now Mercedes-Benz, is being used inside the Zeppelin as a motor engine. But at least the museum don't need a Maybach. But the director likes the Maybach, so now the museum is having a Maybach and can participate on the historical rallies which are happened once a year on Lake Constance. Is also nice. To get it a bit illustrated what it means to develop a spaceship, from the beginning it's implemented to have these physical stations here. So it means they learn how to manufacture the outer shell of the Zeppelin, how to put the color, the silver color on it, and why it was not so easy. Because the Zeppelin at least is a complex stuff. The next one, there's a few folios missing, but maybe I can step back on it. The next one was a Jewish museum where I was really proud and thankful that I had the chance to work with such a museum, which mostly depends also on the team I found in the Jewish museum. The working period was from 1995 to 91 and up to 2010, including all the maintenance tasks we have to do. And the Jewish museum was, it was simply a white paper. Okay, so we are getting a great visionary building from Daniel Liebeskind. And Daniel Liebeskind is a really favorite architect, but the Jewish museum was his first building. Okay, so and always if you have the first building, you can be happy about it and proud about it, but all faults you can do from a favorite architect, you will have in this building. Okay? And of course, we got it. You can see here that is the outer shell. For example, the material which is used in this building was given as a self-cleaning shell. We found out it isn't true. Of course, we need cleaners to clean the outer shell. The next was there is no raindrop or no rain pipe to put out the rainy water. Okay, and in the first winter we had the museum, we had the problem. There are small holes here in this area, and if water is going there, it's becoming frozen. Okay, what's happened if it's becoming warmer? You have ice bombs from the museum. So then we learned, okay, that will not work this way, so we have to put in a heating system. So now the museum is the first building I know which is having a heating system for rainy water, which no visitor will see. And the scope, what we did was conception, design and realization of the learning center, including the cross-media infrastructure. The best of the museum and the real luck for the museum was that the director during this time was Michael W. Blumenthal. And Michael W. Blumenthal was banished by the National Socialism Party during the dark period in Germany, was going to Shanghai, going from Shanghai to the US, ending up in Washington, and becoming a Minister of Finance during the Carter administration, and then becoming a professor in Princeton. And then they were asked, can you do the Jewish Museum because you are a Jewish and maybe you have ideas? And so he stepped back to Berlin in 1996 and becoming the first director of this museum. Michael Blumenthal, and that I learned, was really a strong person. So the way how he interacted with the team was, it was not common, okay? Because right now inside the museum you are asking, can we do it this way, that way, or whatever? For example, Michael Blumenthal simply asked the team of curators and saying, okay, we will have a meeting next Monday at 9. Please present your stories. And there was one hand going up. And if I don't have a story? Yes, and his question or his reply was completely clear. Yes, maybe, yes, and you should look for a different museum. Okay, and that's really a style which is also in Germany not completely common, but the style on this side to see a museum really as a living entity which have to make money, which have to be in success, and focus on this was really also for us, it was really new. And we learned a lot how if you have really a strong museum, really it will be in success. So streamline your story, organize the stuff, and have your vision. And really Michael Blumenthal was bringing in a lot of vision. This here is an example what we did. From the beginning, the story about this museum was that every single digital item has to be stored in a database. So it is not possible to work with this entire information system without touching the database. That from the beginning always was totally clear. Nobody is allowed to do something on paper which is going to later on to being part of the museum. That always was totally clear. This here, that here is a learning center, and the learning center you have you have single stations and you have group stations. Group stations means more than one visitor have to interact with the system, so it's for discussion. And the single station is I am searching for something. The same you have in the so-called PE, permanent exhibition media station, where the differentiation here always is no media station without an object. Okay, you always, that was a policy, you always need an object and you will serve additional information about it, background, foreground related, and it's being used to be a guide. Okay, so if you have a key object, you get information on the digital, but also on the digital you already get information about the next object where you can go over. And it's open or up to you to place there an additional media station, but the main focus always is keep the object in mind. Let the visitor remember this object so that if he is coming back to his family saying, wow, that was really great what I saw there, because that was totally new. That means sometimes it's better to have less objects and more information, but they will keep it in mind. What everybody keeps in mind was this small station, which was, that was the funny side of it, which was the only one station which was not binded to the backend system. Okay, this is it's called a blow interaction. So if you talk about Jewish culture, you are talking about the Torah. which is a kind of a Bible or the words. But these words are not only in stone, okay? It's some light inside. So the media installation was, it will be displayed here, okay? And if a visitor come, he can blow simply, okay? And then all letters will flow away and a new one will come, and giving the slogan for the day or the afternoon or the hour. That was really attractable. And we expect that the visitor will only try it. Yeah? But they really start to read it. That was really new. This here is an installation that was binded. So all this media also was in the backend system. It's for smelling. Smelling, that means every single visitor can pick up these, can smell on it. You have the relation to the object. And here you see the navigation logic. When I show you this put before, you have here, it's called lexicon, which means a directory. So in the early beginning inside the museum, we start to do a directory with special expressions or expressions from the museum. All words which are common to be used in this specific theme is being stored in the database. And from every station, you have here small items, or you have here small items. You can simply click, and also you have linkage, automatically linkage. If you publish the data, it will be indexed automatically and it will be linked to the lexicon, which means the directory, so you get the information about the word, about the thematic, and the same you have with the thesaurus, which is simply the family about it. The next is the Reichsengelhorn Museum in Mannheim, which is this here. The windows you see here are both interactive. That means during the night they are closing their eyes. That was the target, and they simply like it. The museum itself, it's located in, yes, at least 10 houses. And this here is Professor Alfred Wiczorek, which is the head of the museum. And he, from the beginning, was working a lot with temporary exhibits. And the strategy he chose for becoming budgets was always, we are presenting donation dinners, presenting artifacts from the museum during the dinner, which is high attractable in this city, I do not know why. And we have a lot of helpers, and each helper is having the ability to bring something in during temporary exhibit design and so on. So they have nearly no investment for doing the exhibition itself. So for the materials, that is all coming. At least they have over 200 helpers without any pay. So they simply can use it for the exhibit, doing the catering or whatever. Inside the museum, each exhibition is always yeah, it's a little bit like a comic, okay? So, for example, they had a special exhibit for Egypt and for mummies. And they were able to do from the marketing department a work together or a win-win situation with the Deutsche Bahn, which is a railroad company in Germany. And they created a high-speed train, it's called the Mummy Express. Okay. So everybody who is entering this train going from Berlin to Mannheim is seeing, oh, that is a Mummy Express, maybe I should step out and going to this museum. That was really perfect, and it was really working perfect. So I guess at least 50% of the visitors they gain inside this museum was because it's being this interaction or this Crodia linkage between the marketing stuff. From the helpers, I already said, it's starting by the youth, and everybody who, mostly for families, and the museum really is in charge also to bringing projects that young people learn how to make a restoration, how to preserve it, and so on. Also, when you have this exhibition for textile, you have always stations where you can see really details. And you really try to combine your media stuff, not only with a flat screen, also have a microscope. Do it this way that you establishing the communication between your clients or your visitors and your experiences so that you are sharing the knowledge. And the better way you share it, you will get engaged visitors to it. Now it's coming. I do not know why, but that is, now we can go here. It's only from the Zeppelin Museum, a few cabinets. That, for example, is a model from the inside. Oh, I have to. This here, for example, and it's also coming from an integrated system. The main stuff for the Rice Engelhorn is it's combining about 40 different thematical stuff. So they only have a part-wise integrated system, but they are trying to do it. The overall flow for doing it is now over 10 years. So it's really a long time to integrate this data. Don't think that it will be done in a few or couple of months. Never ever. If you have a really good collection, it will not be happened. Here, for example, you see an exhibit. It's called Pediphone, because in the beginning it was designed to be used by feet. It's how to play an instrument which you cannot touch. You have here these silver plates, and each instrument we invite from the orchestra a few musicians, and they played every instrument doing a pentatonic tone, and the visitor can touch these plates here and is getting a melody. And because you have on the vitrine itself, you have 5 sides, 5 visitors at the same time can interact, and it will not be any disharmonic. So it will always be harmonic, and that's a big success with this object, because they are talking about the objects and it's keeping it in mind. It was really... Also, this other stuff is always a combination that this museum is trying always to have dioramas and always to build up how it was and to give the information how it is or how it was here with the media. So always here to have the corresponding stuff. Also from the Rice Engelhorn, it's this here, which is a complete analog museum. But also this museum is having the media completely inside the digital system in the meantime. You have here cans. So the museum was about Schiller. Schiller is a German poet. And it's one of the greatest. So it's beside Goethe, it's the same area. And Goethe and Schiller knows each other. And Goethe was happy to have him as a friend. And the main problem was, it's a really small house, okay? One here, it's only 2 small floors with about 20-25 square meters. And how to bring media in and how to attract people. And we come up with the idea simply to have the poet in cans, okay? This small can, you simply can pick it up, is a hearing station. And you are hearing Schiller's words or poetry or whatever, where you can walk through the garden. Okay. This here was a small multimedia show, and this here, because Schiller was always kind of political place. Okay. So he had to escape from Stuttgart, which is my hometown, to Mannheim. From Mannheim he has to escape to Leipzig, and then he's going around and becoming one of the famous photos. And to illustrate it here, these are stripes, ropes, where you simply can pull it, and then you see several signs what's happened here. But it's unexpected. And to have this as a media situation unexpected at this time, we did it way, or was implemented this way, but all is inside the museum. To keep it as a digital strategy, combined is main stuff always is to have transparency between all your departures. Find a clear understanding and that to streamline your strategy or also your vision. So really you have to talk, and you have to talk that you know, okay, that we are focusing in 1 year, that we are focusing in 5 years, and that we are focusing in 10 years. And always because of that, we have to break it down to the technical, to the workflow, because each technique you have to implement inside the museum will change your workflow. That have to be enrich your library, your collection management, and whatever. So you need training for it. At least the best would be to have one data source for all purposes. It means you can have it inside the database, and then you can publish it everywhere where you need it. Infrastructure planning, that is the follow-up of it, have to be built for 10 years at least. For example, the infrastructure technique in the Zeppelin Museum is now being used for 20 years. For the Jewish Museum, I guess infrastructure will be used for at least 25 to 30 years. But they're doing now a renovation after 15 years, having a new temporary exhibit. Okay. But also you can see if the data is fully integrated, the overall budget, for example, in the Jewish Museum was over 1.5 million. Only for digitalization processes without technique. In Reisengelhorn it was 500,000, and Zeppelin was about between 100 and 200,000 euro. Okay, only for the visitor. That you always have to have in mind, it's different budgets, and you have to know where you should put these budgets in front. Really important, that is a summary of is the split between data and apps. Don't even think to have an integrated or so-called integrated system where your data depends on the application, because then you cannot migrate. And in worst case, really you have to do the whole work again. So always take care that there is an exchange layer inside databases or inside technical stuff where you can say, I can get the data here and I can use it for this purpose. If it all sticks together with the application, you cannot do. Okay? And you have to be open for the future, then you have to split it. Digitalization on workflow always depends, also as a summary, this standard operation procedures, SOPs. You have to know, you cannot simply, we call it always the Chinese way, simply put a lot of people in and everybody is doing, and so we are really fast with inventarization or with digitalization. Normally it will not work, because this work is a high sophisticated work. You have to know how to adjust so that you really can use the data in the future. Processes, as said before, is later on collection management, exhibit planning, fundraising, visitor information, and social media, which is giving the feedback at least. Museums in the future have to be a kind, or must implement a kind of emancipation, to talk with visitor and to have the feedback, and on the self to handle also with profiles, which is right now only Facebook doing, which is the wrong way. That so far is all from my side. So if any question, hesitate to ask.
All right. Thank you so much for your presentation is quite an exciting issue for me because it's quite new to us, I think, the digital issues. Well, I'm afraid that we cannot have questions and comments for this session because we are running out of time, and we have lots of papers waiting for us in the afternoon. So I'm so sorry for that. Okay. But if any of us have any questions to talk with him, to ask him, so please do it afterward. I think he's welcome every questions and comments, right? So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so now it's lunchtime.